Hear now these words as they come to us from 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 32 through 49. David said to Saul, "Let no one's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are just a boy, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and whenever a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, rescuing the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned against me, I would catch it by the jaw, strike it down, and kill it. Your servant has killed both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, since he has defied the armies of the living God." David said, "The Lord, who saved me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, will save me from the hand of this Philistine." So Saul said to David, "Go, and may the Lord be with you." Saul clothed David with his armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. David strapped Saul's sword over the armor, and he tried in vain to walk, for he was not used to them. Then David said to Saul, "I cannot walk with these, for I am not used to them." So David removed them. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones from the wadi and put them in his shepherd's bag in the pouch. His sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. The Philistine came on and drew near to David, with his shield bearer in front of him. When the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. The Philistine said to David, "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. The Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the field." But David said to the Philistine, "You come to me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This very day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head, and I will give the dead bodies of the Philistine army this very day to the birds of the air and to the wild animals of the earth, so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord does not save by sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hand." When the Philistine drew nearer to meet David, David ran quickly toward the battle line to meet the Philistine. David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell face down on the ground.
The story gets told of a young woman. Her name was Mandy from Marietta, Georgia, in high school, stressing about her college applications. She received one application and was working on this application to an Ivy League school. And as part of the initial portion of the application, there was one simple yes or no question. The question, are you a leader? Mandy decided to reflect a little bit on that and very honestly did some introspection as to her personality, as to her way of being, as to how she interfaced with other groups in a social setting, and she determined that she would answer the question honestly. Mandy checked the box no. 3 months later, Mandy received this letter in the mail. Dear Mandy, on behalf of the Board of Trustees, alumni, and the Office of Admissions, I would like to be the first to welcome you to the class of 1997. This year, we welcomed 1,688 new leaders into our university community. We thought it would be good for them to have at least one follower. Confirmation class, that is one of my favorite stories. And it's a story that I thought of when putting myself in your shoes. For really and truly, when I think about the decision that you all have made, and when I think about your participation in the life of the church, I recognize that you are very much in the minority. No, it is not a minority quite as lonely as Mandy's, but it is not the popular route of our day. Many of the adults in the room can recall growing up in a world where the church and faith were closer to the center of society. And in our world, the church and faith are not always popular. To borrow a phrase from the prophet Isaiah, you all as a confirmation class may be a faithful remnant. And though we are so proud of you as a congregation for the journey upon which you have embarked, we have so much hope for your future indeed. But at the same time, we recognize that the world in which you are growing up is not going to make a life of faith and a life of church going easy. But my faith teaches me that there is so much hope for each of you, not just because of how talented you are as individuals, but because of the promise in Scripture that God will always turn toward the young person in the face of even Goliath-sized challenges. For my sense is that your journey of faith confirmation class might be analogous, that's an SAT word, to the story of David and Goliath. And part of what I learned about David in the story is that he was able to overcome a great big challenge precisely because he knew who God created him to be, and he knew his unique spiritual gift. For the wisdom of that young boy in the story, when you think about it, truly was remarkable. For one of the key reasons why I would argue that David was able to conquer Goliath was because he knew uniquely and distinctly who he was, different from everyone else, and lived into that identity. For the story begins with Saul wanting David to be just like him. Saul offers David his tunic, his helmet, his pretty much everything, and David puts it on, and Saul essentially says back to David, David, if you're going to conquer Goliath, then be just like me. But David resisted that temptation to fight Goliath with Saul's armor. And how easy it would have been in the story for David to be like his older brother, Eliab. For you'll recall in 1 Samuel, we're told that Samuel himself said that surely Eliab would be the next king of Israel. He was the one who was tall and sturdy and good looking and would have fit into Saul's armor clearly. I mean, he was a leader. But David did not decide to be like his older brother either. And then, if that wasn't enough peer pressure, Saul and Eliab, David also decided that he wasn't going to be like Goliath or fight Goliath on Goliath's terms. We're told that when Goliath went into battle, he did so with a sword and a spear and a javelin. And what a temptation David must have faced to say, well, if I'm going to conquer Goliath, then I just have to be a shorter and better version of the great big giant. But David decided that he wouldn't. Instead, David, knowing who God created him to be and knowing who and what his spiritual gifts were, picked up that slingshot. And the rest, you might say, is history. Confirmation class, my encouragement to you this morning is to use your slingshot. In whatever vocation you choose, in whatever place of service you pursue, in whatever church or churches you're a part of for the next 50, 70 years, my hope is that you will never forget who God has created you uniquely and authentically to be, and that you will never forget your unique spiritual gifts. For my sense is that no matter the adversity, no matter how challenging your personal life becomes, or no matter how challenging our world gets with Goliath-sized challenges, insofar as you know who you are, created by God, and your spiritual gifts, my sense is that you might and will overcome just about anything that comes your way. I'll close with a final detail about this story of David and Goliath, an Old Testament classic that many of us have heard for so many years. It's a neat detail that I learned in graduate school from my Introduction to Old Testament professor. And I'm going to do some trivia confirmation class. On that day when David took down Goliath, does anybody know how many stones David picked up? Yes. How many stones did he pick up? 5. That's right. Picked up 5 stones. Now, there are some scholars that suggest that David picked up those 5 stones because he wanted to have, backup. But I don't buy it. If you read a little bit later on into 2 Samuel chapter 20, verse 21, you know what you learn about the giant Goliath? Goliath had 4 brothers, and they're all named in the Bible. And so that young boy, David, his intention was to take down Goliath, yes, but then to keep going 4 times over. You know what I learned from that? A young person who knows who God has created them to be, a young person who uses his or her spiritual gifts cannot and will not be stopped.